Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Cramer. Our guest today is Tony Pisanelli. We're going to talk about all right. I'm going to leave this suspenseful. Every once in a while, I like to leave it suspenseful because you do something a little bit different than a lot of my guests. And I want to lead off. Let's talk about what you're doing in your business, Tony. And then we're going to get into a lively conversation around that. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alicia. I appreciate being on board.
So let's talk about your business. Tell us about what you do.
Well, I'm a career change or career transformation coach, Alicia, helping typically professionals who are looking to make some sort of major career change. They've typically had enough of what they've been doing for 25, 30 years, or they've become burnt out and stressed, and they've reached a point where they actually want to do something totally different. So I guide them to find that new direction and help them along that path so that it becomes a reasonably smooth transition and then they don't fall down some sort of hole.
So when we're talking about new direction, and we have an audience here of business owners that are at different stages in their business. We have the startup, sort of fledgling business owner, entrepreneur, all the way up to the seasoned CEO, founder of a company that in many cases they've built from scratch. And I know that a lot of your clients are coming out of a career, a typical career. Maybe they are or are not a business owner. But now for our business owners that are listening, there probably are some people who feel that sort of inner calling for a change of direction. And sometimes that means exiting a business. Sometimes that means leaving the world of entrepreneurship to get a job somewhere and start a new career. Obviously, that can be someone leaving their career and transitioning into entrepreneurship. But you mentioned something to me that I think is really important. And that is that you really specialize in working with people who are an expert at something and taking that expertise and where do we go with that? So I'm curious, when you're working with a client, let's even say that they are a seasoned business owner and they want to transition into something else. Maybe their heart's just not in it anymore. Or we do see oftentimes business owners that exit their company. They sell it, right? And they want to start something new. They want to do something different. Where do you start with someone who knows that they need a change, really genuinely wants a change, and is at that beginning stage in the journey?
Okay, so in the case of someone who's been running their business, Alicia, let's say for 20, 30 years, and I know from my own experience, it can be quite an exhausting journey. So they've reached a point where that business ownership has come to an end, but they don't necessarily want to retire from life and just settle down, because typically those people that have run their own business, and I've spoken to a few in my own journey, are very dynamic people, highly productive, fast moving, always on the go. Okay, would that be a fair premise?
I think so.
Okay, so to go from that dynamic world and then all of a sudden stop and do nothing doesn't work for their mindset, their brains. They need to be kept active and on the go. They just can't stop. So I worked probably going back 12, 18 months with a guy who was in the building industry who owned that business. Okay. And he reached a point where his body wouldn't allow him to do what it did once. His shoulders had gone on him with the heavy lifting. His knees had gone in on him as well. So he needed to get out of that game. Is that a fair call? So he's in the business world. He wanted to do something else. So then that becomes the question, well, what else does he do, given he's not going to be someone who just sits back and does nothing? Okay, so we sat down and explored his options. So in his business journey, he had a lot of apprentices working for him. So these were the young people coming through. Maybe one day they would get their own builder's license. And he really developed relationships with these people, even though he was their employer. And he got to know some of the challenges and struggles they had as young men trying to save money to buy a house and the dynamics around relationships. So he got out of his business and became a tutor or a lecturer in the TAFE college system, teaching young apprentice builders and carpenters. Does that make sense? So
It
he took
does. It does.
his knowledge and skills from the building industry and became a teacher.
So I love
And
this example because there are so many people who their identity really gets entangled with what they have been doing for 20, 30 or so years. Even a 10-year business veteran can easily start to take on this identity of I am this person, I am this business owner. And then when it's time to make a change, and when I say time, you use the example of somebody who physically needed to make the change. A lot of people, though, are experiencing other types of symptoms of needing to make a change. They're just not fulfilled anymore. Their heart is calling them to do something else. They might not have crystal clear clarity on what that is, but there's that inner knowing, if you're willing to hear it in those earlier subtle stages, that something has to change. And when you're talking about identifying this particular client's sort of gifts and talents and abilities, it makes logical sense that he would be able to take that expertise and be of service in a different way that was a better fit for him at this new stage in his life. So when you're working with your clients, is this kind of like an overarching theme? What is going on? Like, what is the mindset of people who come to you? What's going on in them where they recognize something's got to change?
typically, more often than not, I've discovered, Alicia, is there is something missing. And you use the word they're unfulfilled. Something's not filled in them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that is actually missing? I remember working with a client many years ago. She was an executive, a sales executive in a pharmaceutical company, and she'd climbed the ladder. She got to the top of the ladder, and in that moment where it's supposed to be a moment of celebration because you've hit the pinnacle, she said, I felt nothing. Do you get it? I see you're nodding your head. She felt nothing. Is this all there is?
Yeah.
So I sat down and explored with her, well, what was that? And she identified what was missing was a real sense of joy in the work that she was doing. And that's what's really not there for a lot of people. The joy's gone, or it was never there.
Yeah. That is probably a profound point that a couple of people, even listening, who perhaps have been feeling some unfulfillment, need to ponder, because a lot of people do get into business for the wrong reasons. And so we're always given that opportunity to pivot, but people get very complacent and very comfortable in their sort of status quo. And I think that we need to take time and really be honest with ourselves. Are we fulfilled? Why are we doing what we're doing? Are we doing it for the right reasons? So then when you are working with that client and she identifies that that passion is missing in her life, how do you help your clients identify what is the right direction to go?
Well, one of the beginning point in my coaching methodology, Alicia, is to go back typically into the person's childhood and connect them back to their story. Because at some point when they were very young, there was a dream or a yearning inside them in terms of what they wanted to do with their life. And then as time progressed, Alicia, what happened was parents come along and they impose a certain direction on them, or a teacher or someone else. And all of a sudden, they've gone on different tangents. Can you relate to that?
I think most people can to some
Yeah.
extent. How many people had the dream when they were a child and were so, they had so much conviction about that dream that they carried it to fruition in their adult lives. Most people don't. Most people are sort of talked out of, and I'm not even talking about being a fireman or an astronaut, right? I'm saying a lot of us do have some signs, if you will, when we're young that we gravitate towards certain things. Certain things light us up inside.
Perfect. I mean, I shared the story of the builder. Before we sat down to map out the next path from owning his own building business to becoming a teacher in the building industry, I took him back to his childhood and asked him, well, what was it that made you go into the building industry? Did your parents guide you in that direction? He goes, no, when they lived in a particular house and the parents did a home renovation at one point, Alicia, and he was captivated by the carpenter and the builder, and he would follow them around. And if they dropped a nail, he would pick it up and he just would observe what they would do. If there was contractors and construction work going on in the street where they were digging up the roads, he would come out and he would watch them. He had a fascination of watching constructing people and builders. He even, because there wasn't much room in the back of their house to build a cubby house, he went under the house and built one under there. So can you see? It was a fire and a passion inside him to play with buildings.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. So he was on the right path, but the shift or the pivot and the change in direction was, my body can't do this anymore. I can't crawl under houses. It's like, well, then become a teacher, become a mentor, become an advisor, and use the brain more than the body.
This is such a beautiful conversation to have because a lot of people listening, they're still in growth mode in their business. And so for them, they're not necessarily feeling called to make any changes. But I know that there are some people who are feeling called to pivot. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to completely transition out of what is known. In fact, it's very likely that there are already sort of seeds of greatness apparent in your life, in your business. And sometimes it is a matter of just embracing that it's time for change and exploring what that can look like.
Exactly. A career change or even changing from your business doesn't mean that you throw all of that out and start again. You can just take one facet of what you've done in the past and move that forward. So if you've been in business for 25 years, you can ask yourself the question, what specifically did you enjoy most when you were running your business? And then how can you develop that into an expertise? For example, did you enjoy the marketing and selling side of that? Can you now take that part and become a coach or a consultant, helping the next small business with the coaching and selling side of it? Or did you enjoy the time management aspect of it so that you didn't become overwhelmed? What was the expertise, particularly that you developed from your business journey, that you can now pass on to others? Because there's plenty of people out there who left their employment during the Great Resignation that are starting to try and start their own businesses. How can you help them on their journey? We're all on a journey of some sort, Alicia, and we need assistance and guidance to go through that. Everyone has a role to play in guiding someone else, as we need to be guided by others.
Absolutely. So I want to shift gears just a little bit, and I want to speak to you as the owner of your own business. And one of the questions that I do love to occasionally ask a guest is if there is a specific mindset challenge that you're willing to share with us, something that you've had to overcome on your journey in order to get to where you are today.
I think one of the biggest, earliest challenges I faced was coming to recognize that the coaching world is fairly crowded, particularly in the career space. I compete with employment advisors and career counselors, and we all get thrown into the same sort of crowd, if you like. And the challenge was, well, how do I make myself different? How do I make myself stand out so that I'm the one that gets recognized and become a go-to person in my field, rather than just becomes hit and miss whether someone finds me or not? So that was the challenge I needed to address quite early. And one of the ways I did that was through becoming an author and writing a book, which then positioned me as an authority in this field rather than just someone in the crowd.
We talked a tiny little bit before we started the recording of this about the importance of embodying the right mindset, and that there's a lot of individuals coming into the coaching industry that are, and I don't want to say they're necessarily thinking like an employee, but they're certainly not thinking like a business owner. And I want to talk to that for just a moment, because I know that our audience does not include all coaches. We have everyone across the board in terms of industry. But there is something to be said about the mindset shifts that need to occur as a new business owner, because regardless of whether you're coming out of a career and transitioning into the owner operator role, or you are, even a stay-at-home mom who is now for the first time taking on a business role. And it's not just coaching, right? It's any type of business. It could be something that once was a hobby that is now becoming a full-fledged business. But from your experience, what is that shift that needs to occur within someone? What does it actually mean to embody the mindset of a business owner?
I think the mindset that I believe that needs to be embodied in an employee or a business owner is the mindset of a calling. You use that word very early on. So an employee, Alicia, their mindset is, I do a job, I get paid. The mindset of some business owners, and I need to be very careful of, I don't want to get any of your audience offside, of some business owners, and I've seen that in some interactions I've had, is they come in, they deliver a service and they want to get paid, and the client or the customer, in my case, feels like it was just a transaction. I've seen other business owners, and there was a gentleman who did some gardening work for me, his mindset that he embodied was that of a calling. He didn't come just to renovate my garden. He came to beautify my home. So he stepped off my property before he redesigned my garden and looked at the character of the home. So he would create a garden that enhanced the character of the home and beautified it. And when he'd finished the job, Alicia, he didn't just leave and you never see him again. 4 weeks afterwards, he came back just to check on the garden to see how it was progressing in the warmer climate, to make sure the plants had taken off and were still thriving. The reason he did that, because his calling was to be a gardener and landscaper. It wasn't just as a business owner serving a customer. There was a bigger picture at play. When he would go on holidays, Alicia, he went to an overseas garden to look at the different gardens in the world to get ideas that he would bring back to his work. Can you see? This was a calling, not a job, not a business.
I love that. I can't even begin to tell you how much I love that. One of my philosophies, and you'll see it weaved throughout all of my different marketing, is often talking about our inner calling. And I always say that's a divine inner calling. There's a reason that we feel the way that we feel. And it is the differentiator between that fulfillment and unfulfillment. It is the differentiator between the client or customer experience being a positive one, a lackluster one, or wherever it ends up landing, right? And I love that we're sort of bringing this full circle now, because we started with that inner calling for change. And now we're talking about that work that we're doing, whatever that is, whether it's in a career or it's in a business, and really a business is a career, right? It's feeling that fulfillment. It's feeling in alignment and congruent with that inner calling. And that is such a beautiful way to live life, in my opinion. And I'm sure most people would agree.
Well, yes, it's almost the only way. Yeah, it's so important. And a lot of people, and I credit you, Alicia, you've recognized that a lot of people don't make that realization until the back end of their life. One of the saddest stories I came across, which actually motivated my work, was there was a gentleman on his deathbed, if you like, and he shared the story with his nurse and she passed it on. And the gentleman described to her, as he was, in the last few hours of his life, was, I'm experiencing 2 types of pain. The first pain was the pain in his body from the illness that he was suffering from. But then there was another pain, and that was an even bigger pain. And that pain was the emotional pain of when he looked back on his life and discovered he never really lived the life he wanted to live. That's what inspires my work with people. That's a calling. I didn't want to miss that life for me, and I don't want others to miss theirs.
This has been an episode packed with a lot of powerful things for people to contemplate. Now, Tony, I need to make sure we let our listeners know how they can connect with you. So can you share with us your website and anywhere else that you want to direct people to?
Well, they can find me at tonypisanelli.com. I don't know if you make that visible to people. Mm-hmm. And if they also want to look into my book, which is called The Phoenix Career Principles, which is on Amazon, which helps share stories. It's got compelling stories about people who connected their careers to a higher life purpose. which then became a more fulfilling path rather than going into work each day, collecting their pays and going home, and then the next day repeating that whole cycle of repetition, repetition, repetition. So that's two ways. And I'm also on LinkedIn if people want to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much, Tony, for being with us and sharing your wisdom and your insights and giving people some really powerful things to think about.
Been a pleasure. And thank you for a wonderful interview, Alicia. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our listeners. You know we're doing this for you. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.